Hello, and welcome to another episode of Movies, they're pretty good. I'm your host, Travis Dudding, and Oscar month is upon us. So I thought it would be fun for every episode this week, or this month, to do an Oscar winner, specifically Best Picture winners this month. So, I'm going to kick it off with one of my favorites in this category and just in general, because it is just one of the great movies. The Silence of the Lambs, 1991, Jonathan Demme. All right, let's get into it. All right, so we open on a scene in the woods near Quantico, Virginia. We see Agent Clarice Starling, played by Jodie Foster, running an obstacle course. We see from her sweater that she is in the FBI Academy. And we just see her climbing some rope hill thing or whatever, and then just jogging and stuff. She's all working up a sweat and everything. And then she's just out running, and then she is approached by somebody. Says Agent Starling, Crawford wants to see you. So she leaves, and this is the first of 50 times that she'll get pulled from training in the middle of something. It seems to be a recurring thing throughout the movie of she's in the middle of a training exercise and someone comes and pulls her out. But so she goes to see Jack Crawford, played by Scott Glenn, and she's waiting for him to get in there. He's not in his office yet, so she's just looking at the pictures on the wall. There's a lot of crime scene photos, and then there's clippings from newspapers, and it's all centered around this serial killer, Buffalo Bill. And once so Crawford gets in there, and he says hey, we're doing this behavioral analysis study on serial killers, and but one in particular is giving us trouble. That's Dr. Hannibal Lecter. Clarice says, "Oh, Hannibal the Cannibal," as he's known. And so basically what he wants is for her to go in and see if he'll work with her, because she's a new face and everything, and she's a trainee, so maybe he will cooperate with her, because he hasn't been cooperating with anybody. But then during this, and she's does this have anything to do with Buffalo Bill? And he's no. He's denying it, and he's no, not really. It's just something that I figured would be good for you. So then it cuts to Dr. Chilton, and he's working at the psychiatric center in Baltimore where Hannibal Lecter is being held. And you could tell he's just completely full of himself and thinks the world of him. He refers to himself as Hannibal Lecter's nemesis, and tries to say that that's how Hannibal Lecter feels about him. But as we will see later on, you could easily tell once you meet Hannibal Lecter, just from their respective vibes, that Lecter doesn't give a shit about this guy, and Chilton just thinks the world of himself, and he's just a arrogant douchebag type of guy, and whatever. But that's enough about him. So he but then Chilton, like I said, douchebag, starts hitting on Clarice, saying they've sent a lot of agents, but none of them are as pretty as you. And then she's oh, okay. Kind of brushes him off, but also kind of says oh, kind of plays into it, but also brushes him off as hey, this is a person that is above me, so like I have to at least pretend to respect them. Or another, and also it's like just being a woman, like you don't want to, like if a guy's putting out a bad vibe like that, and then some women might feel like they have to play along just to not escalate it, because he could easily be one of those like, oh, like, you know, you turn him down and then he turns violent or something like that, you know. And none of that is spoken, but that's just the sense that you get, like in a few different scenes. Like she has to, like, you know, it's, and they show it kind of metaphorically throughout, like maybe metaphorically is not the right word, but you see it a lot. Like there's shots of her being the one woman with like surrounded by a bunch of men that are a lot taller than her, and it's like visually representing that, like, oh, she's a little girl in a man's world or anything like that. And it's not that it's like, it's not that it's the way that that should be, but it's just, it's how you would have felt. And this is also 1991, so it's not that everything's like perfect now, but things have progressed a lot since then. So probably not a lot of female FBI agents at the time and everything. So it is just like you're lost in this, you're navigating this world that until now wasn't made for you. And you gotta like play the game, but also hold your own, and also like change it too. You know, you gotta play the game in order to change the game, that type of thing. You know, it shouldn't be like that, and there's other ways to do it, but that's just the sense that you get about her. And then, so then they're like warning her about Hannibal Lecter, and then he's like taking her down to where he's being held, and just telling her the story, like, hey, like, you know, don't give him anything, don't get too close to the glass, like, and he'll mess with you and trick you, like he's like tricky like that. And he tells her a story about how one time Lecter was complaining of chest pains, so they went in to take him to the infirmary or whatever, and they get him in there, they hook him up to an EKG and everything, and he attacks the nurse that's you know, helping him and whatever. And we don't see the photo that Clarice is looking at, and but from the description we could tell that she is very like disfigured, and like took out one of her eyes, and they had to like reset her jaw, like the paramedics had to do all this. And then he's saying that since Lecter was hooked up to an EKG, they're able to monitor this, like his pulse never got above 85 even when he ate her tongue. So this is kind of just like, hey, this is what you're dealing with. Just a fair warning. And so they get down there. Clarice is like, hey, like, I don't think, you know, if Lecter really does think that you're his arch nemesis, then maybe you shouldn't be there, and maybe he'll be more open to answering my questions if you're not there. And then he gets all like mad about that. It's like, oh, well, I guess you should have told me that back at the office. And then once again she's playing that game, like, well, then I wouldn't have like enjoyed the pleasure of your company, like, here or whatever, you know, kind of like stroking his ego a little bit to like keep him on her side, that way she can keep doing her job, you know, because otherwise he's just going to make it difficult. So she's in this room and everything, and we see like the like orderlies, and there's a security guard, and he's like loading a bunch of ammo and everything. So this is like heavy duty maximum security psychiatric ward basically. And then she gets led into the hallway, and it's this, you know, typical like creepy stone walls and everything. It's all dimly lit, and then all the inmates are being all weird as she's walking down, and especially Miggs, who says as she's walking by, I can smell your cunt. And so she just keeps walking, though. It's like, it doesn't pay him any mind. And then we see Hannibal Lecter, played by Anthony Hopkins, just standing like in the exact center of his cell, like completely still and everything, just like really, really weird, really off-putting, really iconic too, you know, spoofed in a lot of things, like specifically Dr. Evil and Austin Powers and Goldmember this is the first time I caught a reference to this exact scene. So they start talking and everything, and she introduces herself, and he's starting to grill her like, oh, like you work for Crawford, don't you? And just like asking her all these like tough questions and everything, just kind of like trying to figure out who she is, you know, not asking a lot of direct stuff, making a lot of assumptions, and also just like kind of seeing how she reacts and everything like that. Just like, because he's he was a psychologist, so he not only is he a mentally ill serial killer, but he's also very smart and knows how to manipulate people because he's dealt with that. He's studied the brain, he's studied the mind, he's studied behavior, all that stuff. So he's really good. And she's just like kind of tries to segue into the questionnaire that she has to ask him, and he's like, oh no, you were doing so good, and like what makes you think I'm gonna help you or anything like that. And so she just keeps trying to like get information out of him, and he's like, a census taker once tried to test me, and I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti, and he does the so like obviously everyone knows that scene. Like you've either seen the scene or you've seen it referenced, heard it, maybe didn't know what it was, but if you think Hannibal Lecter, that's what you're thinking of. And then so he's like trying to scare her, but also just like but I mean he's telling the truth, but he is also just trying to like freak her out too. So basically like says like, I'm not gonna tell you anything, and so she leaves and tells her to just go away. And as she's like leaving, we hear Miggs, the one that was like told her that he could smell her cunt as she was walking in. We hear him like talking to himself, and he says something about like he cut his wrists to see the blood or something like that. And but then we see as the camera goes down the hall from her POV that he's completely naked at this point and definitely doing some jerking off there in the bed. And then as she gets up to him, up like next to his cell, he just throws his load at her and hits her in the hair and everything. And then she's like, obviously disgusted by that. And then the other cellmates are like yelling like, Miggs, like, you fucking idiot and everything. And then Lecter calls her back and saying like, no, like that shouldn't have happened to you. I'm sorry that happened to you. Like I'll give you a little bit of information, like basically as like his way of like making amends. Like, hey, like I'm sorry this thing happened to you. You didn't deserve that. Like here's a little bit of information. And he says like look within yourself, and then talks about an old patient to look up, Miss Moffat, Hester Moffat. So we see her leaving after that. You can tell she's like visibly shaken up about it and everything. And then we get a little bit of a flashback to her as a little girl and like walking up to her dad. Her dad is a police officer. We see him getting out of his car, like he just got home from work and everything. And it's like a very nice scene and everything. You could tell it wasn't like anything like a bad relationship with her dad or anything like that, So whatever trauma in her past, like it wasn't him. Like he was good. So we know that so far. And then after the flashback, it cuts back to her, and then she's just like breaking down like outside of the car, as anyone would in that situation. So then it cuts back to a little montage of her doing some training exercises, like kind of like clearing rooms and stuff like that. And then, but she like, forgets to check the corner of the room, and she gets like quote unquote shot, like boom, you're dead, like what'd you mess up, like, oh, like I forgot to check the corner, and then like yep, and that's why you're dead. So that'll come back into play later. Then she gets called out of training again. Like she's like, oh, like you got a phone call. She takes the phone call, and it's Crawford saying that Miggs is dead. And then she's like, what? Like sorry, like I don't know how to feel about that, because it's like, you know, should this guy be dead? Maybe, maybe not. But also like he like violated me. You know, it's like it's a mixture of emotions, and basically it's like the orderlies heard Hannibal Lecter whispering to him all night, and then in the morning they found him dead because he swallowed his own tongue, basically. So Lecter is like messing with his head and basically convinced him to kill himself, basically. And then so she's following up on this lead that Lecter gave her. She's at a storage facility, and I think it's called like Your Self Storage. So that's like a little bit of a wordplay that he was giving, like look within yourself. And so she finds like a storage unit like leased out to Hester Moffat, and she's trying to get it open with the owner there, but the door's jammed and everything. So she goes and gets a jack out of her car and gets the door open like just enough for her to crawl in there. She does crawl in, but she cuts her leg. So she's in there, you know, and then she's just in there looking around. There's like a bunch of like antiques and just like old stuff in general. And then there's a car, like an old car that's has a very large American flag draped over it. She pulls the flag off. She's opens the car door and like gets in there, and it's like a luxury car and everything too, like probably like a 30s 20s 30s 40s like Rolls Royce type. I don't know if that's what it was, because you don't see like the logo or anything like that, the emblem, but it's that type of car. And so she gets inside and she's looking around, and there's something with like a napkin over it, a blanket, something, a sheet. And there's also like a mannequin with no head. It's got a dress on and everything. And then she pulls the veil off of whatever's covered, and it is a jar with a severed head in it. So, you know, obviously hard cut away from that. And she's back to visiting Lecter. But it's a little different this time. Like all the lights are off and we can't see him. Like it's just completely dark in there. And so she's just asking like, oh, like I figured out your anagram. Like Hester Moffat was an anagram for Miss the Rest of Me. And then we also find out that that this facility belonged to, and the head belonged to, a former patient of Dr. Lecter. And I don't know, I forgot to write the name down, but she's like, oh, like, did you kill him? And he's like, no, like, I didn't do that to him. That's how I found him when he had missed a couple of his appointments, you know? So he went to like go do a wellness check, I guess, and found his severed head in a jar. But then he kind of changes the subject when she starts a question like, oh, like, do you know who did do it? But he kind of avoids that question. And then she's like, oh, like, I noticed like all your drawings are gone. And he's like, oh, like that was my punishment for what happened to Miggs. So basically he's grounded, and they took all his like art and everything. They turned the lights off, and they're making him watch some televangelist preacher on the TV. And And we could see that they had wheeled the TV like outside of his cell, but it's muted while she's there, and then like they'll turn it up loud once she leaves. Basically, is what he says. And so he's like, "Oh, like I'll help you if, but like I need something from you, like a quid pro quo, I think is what it is." And basically like, hey, if you can get me transfer to a better facility, a federal facility where I don't have to deal with Chilton, then that would be great. Like I want to view, I want to see the trees, I want to see the ocean, anything you can do that's better than here. Like, so if you can get me that deal, then I'll give you some information on what I do know. And so then it cuts away from that to Memphis, Tennessee. We see a car driving down the road. It's Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, American Girl playing, and the woman that's driving is singing along at the top of her lungs, and she's just driving. Follow her. She gets home to her apartment and everything, and she's getting groceries out of the car. And as she's walking, we see she notices, like we, the audience, and her, sees a man trying to get like a chair into a van, but he's got a cast on his arm and he's struggling with it and just like making a big show of it and everything. So she's like, she notices this and is like hesitant, but then asks like, hey, like, do you need help? And he's like, oh yeah, like, could you? That'd be great. And he's like, oh, grab that end and pull it in. So he's like, he's making her pick it up and like lift it in to the van, like with herself. And he's going to push it from the outside. So it's red flag number one. And so she does it. She gets in there and she's like, oh yeah, just get it all the way back in there. And then he like, once the chair's all the way in, he gets inside too. And he's like, hey, are you about a size 14? And she's like, what? And then he beats her over the head, knocks her unconscious. She's laying down, like face down on the, I don't know, maybe the chair, maybe the floor of the van, whatever. And he grabs some scissors and like cuts her. Oh no! First he like just checks the tag, and he's very pumped to find out that she is in fact a size 14. And then he cuts the dress off of her, and just like he like cuts it straight up the back, and is just like opens it and is just like admiring her back. And then we don't really know what that's about yet. And he's just like, oh yeah, oh good, yeah. And then cuts away from that scene, and it's like, okay. So then we get back to Clarice Starling, and she gets notified that, hey, there's a body in West Virginia. We think it's Buffalo Bill related. So Crawford wants you to go with him, get on a plane and go investigate this with them. You know, go check out the body, see what you know, see what you can figure out. So they're in the car on the way to see the body, and Crawford's just like kind of just like quizzing her. It's like, oh, like, tell me as much as you know, like at this point. And is like, she says like, oh, he's probably a white male because serial killers tend to hunt within their own race, which I don't know if that's true. Something like, I've only ever heard that in this movie, so I wonder if there's any truth to that. I haven't seen the Dahmer Netflix thing, but I know at least from clips I've seen that he hunted at least one person that wasn't within his race. So I don't know. Maybe he's the exception to the rule, or maybe, you know, they just had some false, you know, made up some bullshit for this movie. Who knows? But anyways, I always am curious about that, but never curious enough to actually do any research on it. So then they get to the funeral home, and it's kind of crazy that like, hey, we're going to go do this autopsy literally one room over from where a funeral is happening. And there's like a bunch of cops in there. It's like full of like every cop in this small town apparently is right there. And then They clear them out and everything, but first, not before every single man just like stares at her like, what's the woman doing here, that type of thing, because they're all very like country bumpkin. That's the kind of the vibe you get from the town, not to not to be prejudiced or anything like that, but that's just like the vibe that is portrayed from the movie. And then as she's waiting in that with all these cops, then she gets a flashback to her dad's funeral. So we get little pieces of information, little by little, throughout the movie on like what happened in her life, because you could tell that there's some, something happened. Like Lecter picked up on it, but he wants to know what it is too. Like sometimes he's the audience surrogate, and like we're just like, he just wants to find out what happened in her life. So they get in the room where they're gonna view the body. They put I don't remember if they say, but they put some kind of substance, ointment, under their nostrils because of the smell when you're dealing with a dead body. I don't know if that's like usual practice, or if it's just because this body was in the water for a couple weeks, so it's a little more decomposed, a little more rot, all that stuff. They open it up. Everyone kind of like tries not to gag and everything, and they're looking, and Clarice notices like, hey, like, is there something in her mouth? Like, did you guys check that? And then the like country doctor is like, sometimes when the body's in the water, you get like leaves and stuff in there. And they get some tweezers, like whatever the like forceps, I think is the medical tweezers term, and pull something out, and it's a bug cocoon. And they're like, whoa, like what is that? Like, so she's like, okay, like I'm gonna figure out what kind of bug this is. They put it in a little jar, and she puts some kind of solution in there to like keep it preserved until she can get it checked out. And then they flip the body over and notice that her skin is cut out in a like a diamond pattern. And they're like, oh, like one of the other victims also had her skin cut, but it was a different pattern than this. So like, what's they're just trying to speculate on the significance of that. So she goes to these some of her friends who are bug experts in DC, and they're like playing chess or checkers with like live bugs, and they're like moving around on the board on their own and everything. And then so they're analyzing. They're the complete dorks and everything. They're just like really, typical movie nerds and everything. But it's not played up too much. It's not like broad or anything like that. But you could tell like these guys don't get out much, and bugs are their life. And so they're analyzing it, and they kind of open the cocoon up, and it's a death's head moth. But it's weird that it's there because those are native to Asia, and it's saying like, so if it like whoever put it in there probably raises these, because you wouldn't just have a cocoon from an Asian moth. And then so after we get this information, and then he's also like, oh yeah, somebody loves these moths. Like you could tell, like it was raised properly and everything like that. So then it cuts to a bunch of moths in a basement, and then as the camera's going through the basement, we see the kidnapper from earlier. He's sitting at a sewing machine, naked, but we don't see like what he's sewing or anything like that. And then it keeps going, and then we see a well, and then down the well is Catherine, the girl that he kidnapped earlier. So then we see like a news thing. All the FBI cadets are watching on the TV, and it turns out the girl that was kidnapped was the a senator's daughter. And so she's doing like a little press conference type thing, and the Clarice's friend like notices like, hey, like what she's doing is like really smart. That's like, yeah, like she's saying her daughter's name over and over again, and then just like humanizing her. That way, the kidnapper will view her as a person and not an object, basically. And then so she just kept saying like, my daughter Catherine, please, like bring Catherine home, Catherine. So then she goes back to talk to Lecter. Chilton's in there throwing a BF, and he's all mad, like what are you doing? Like, you need to let me know what's going on. And but she's like, no, don't care. And then basically she goes and tells Lecter like, hey, like if you help me, like the senator said like she'll transfer you to wherever you want to go. And then like says like, hey, there's this VA hospital, it's like right on the water and everything, and you'll be able to go walk the beach and go swimming under SWAT surveillance and all this stuff. And but you got to help us. And he's like, okay, like I'll help you, but you have to tell me about yourself, and like, and don't lie to me because I'll know if you lie. So one thing that they notice is that all of the women that he's kidnapped and killed are all not. They're all around a size 14, as we saw like when he kidnaps her, like asks her like, hey, are you a size 14? So he needs like women of a certain size that he's targeting. Like, I don't want to say larger women, like he says, because size 14 is not that big, but that's the inclination. Like, he needs women of this certain size, but we don't know why yet. And then we also find out that the severed head in the jar also had the same type of moth cocoon in his mouth. And so there is a connection. We know that this, that it was Buffalo Bill who killed this guy too. So there is a Lecter connection, but not a direct connection, but you know what I mean. Oh yeah. So she starts to talk a little bit about like, Lecter asks her like, hey, like what happened after your dad died? Like, where'd you go? Because you were young. And she said, oh, I went to go live with my mom's cousin and her husband and a ranch in Montana. But like, she was only there for 10 months. And he's like, oh, like, how come you were only there? And he starts to like, he's like speculating like, oh, did the rancher molest you and stuff like that? And she's like, no, that's, he's a very kind person, like that never happened. And then she's like, okay, then how come you were only there 10 months? And she said, I ran away. But yeah, we don't get to the reason until later. So then it's like, okay, so now you got to tell me a little bit more about this person. And he talks about how he's talking about the person with the severed head, and how that he believed himself to be, they say transsexual, as transgender is the proper term now, and is saying he believed himself to be transgender, but he wasn't, and then for a number of reasons, like that this was just a mental illness that he had, and that because he didn't fit any of the other characteristics of transgender people, and like all these reasons, like it was basically just a person just with a severe identity crisis is what he's implying. And then also just like, hey, like if you're looking for somebody who thought that they were transgender, they probably tried to get a gender reassignment surgery and got denied for it. So maybe you should look into the hospital records of people who like signed up for this surgery and were declined. Like, that might be a good way to start. So Then we cut to back to the well in the basement, and Catherine's down there, and Buffalo Bill's up top, and he's telling her to. He's lowered some lotion down to her, and he's trying to make her like lotion up, and he's doing the like he's trying to objectify her, like say like not like objectify women, like but like literally objectify, and he's saying like it puts the lotion on the skin. Like he's not saying like, oh, she should do this, you should do this. He's not even is not won't like directly say you. It's just saying like it and referring to her in the third person. Uh and then she's like, no, please, like let me out of here. And then it's like, and then she finally, and he's just yelling at her, and then she puts some lotion on and everything, and then he's like, okay, like put the lotion in the basket, like so he can like pull it back up, and then she's just like, it's like, no, please, mister, like my mom, she's a senator, it's like we have a lot of money, like please, like whatever you need, like just get me out of here. And then he's just like not wanting to hear it, and he's like, put the fucking lotion in the basket. And then she just starts crying and sobbing, and he like mockingly like back at her, and it's very off-putting, unsettling a little bit. And then oh yeah, and then as the lotion is being raised back up out of the like pit, we see that Catherine notices that there's these bloody handprints, and that there is a broken fingernail in the rocks. So she is realizing now that, hey, I'm not the first person to be put down here, and whoever was down here before didn't make it and tried to escape, and just it didn't work out. And yeah, so it's like it's not looking good for me. So then we see oh yeah, Chilton's talking to Lecter, and he's like trying to be all intimidating to him, and like, oh, like you like this, like these restraints that you have on, like I designed these myself and all this stuff. And he's just like, just being his normal like dumb self and everything, and phony and everything. And but like Lecter's like, he's very focused on a pen that is sitting in the room, and he just keeps like staring at this pen and everything, and then the camera's focusing on it and everything, so he's just like tuning out everything Chilton's saying. And then we see Crawford getting a call saying like, hey, like did you authorize a trainee to give Lecter a phony offer about getting a transfer from saying that the senator did it because she's pissed about it. And then he's like, yeah, like I rolled the dice on that, like I'm sorry, but like we're getting information, and that's what's important. And they're like, okay, like, well, he's being moved to Memphis and everything, and then the senator wants to meet him there. And so we see flash to the Memphis airport, plane's pulling in, it's pulling into like a private hangar and everything, and like all these cop cars are showing up and everything, and like not a limo, but like a town car or whatever, pulling up with the senator, and she's getting out, and we see Lecter, like he's in his like crazy restraints and everything, and he's just like on a dolly, and it's just funny, like him getting like wheeled around like he's furniture. And oh yeah, so then the Memphis police are like, hey, like here, Dr. Chilton, you want to sign over the transfer papers? And Chilton goes to grab his pen out of his pocket, and he can't find it, so his pen's missing. So Lecter has the pen, like we can easily deduce that, but like what's he gonna do with it? So then the senator comes up and is talking to him like, hey, like, what do you know? Like, what do you know about my daughter? What do you know about the kidnapper? All that stuff. And he's just like beating around the bush, and he's saying like, oh, like, did you, and he's like asking her, hey, did you breastfeed your daughter? And she's like, what? Like, yes. Like, why are you asking me that though? Like, and then he's going on about like people who lose a limb and they have like phantom pains and they could still feel, like they could still feel their hand that's not there anymore. And he asks her like, when your daughter's dead on the slab, where will it tickle you? And then she's like, get this thing out of here. And then as she walks away, then Lecter's like, oh, like his name is Louis Friend, and has like this whole description and everything. So it gives this detailed description of Buffalo Bill. And you'll later find out that the name is wrong, but the description was correct and everything. But you don't find out that until quite later. And then, so he gets transferred over to City Hall for some reason. I don't know why. They never explain why, like, they put him here, didn't take him to, like, the jail or something like that. But for whatever reason, they decided the best place was to build a giant cage in the middle of a, like, old ballroom in City Hall. And it looks really cool. It's like, I don't know, like the Memphis police department was very concerned with the aesthetics of where they were going to keep Hannibal Lecter. But I mean, it looks great. It looks great for a movie, but if you think about the logistics, it's just kind of weird. But yeah, so he's in this like giant cage in the middle of the room, and then Starling goes to talk to him, and trying to get a little more information, vice versa, and so he's asking her like, hey, like, so why did you run away? And she said that she woke up in the middle of the night, or maybe early in the morning, and heard a strange noise. And he's like, oh, what was the noise? And it said it sounded like screaming, like almost like a child's scream, but different. And he's like, oh, okay, like, what was the noise? And said it was lambs being slaughtered. So she like traced the noise back to a barn, peeked inside, and it was all those lambs, and they were screaming. And so it's like, okay, like, what did you do? And she said, like, I tried to set them free, but when I opened the door, like, they just stood there confused. So she took one of the lambs and ran away with it. But she didn't have any food or anything, and she wasn't like properly dressed, and it was cold, and she got picked up by a sheriff in the morning and everything, and Lecter asked like, and what happened to the lamb? And she said they killed it. And then so like they had her. I think she went to foster care after that. Like, I forgot to write that down. But basically, and then he's like asking like, hey, like, when you close your, like, when you wake up in the morning, like, do you still hear them screaming? Like, you wake up hearing the screaming of the lambs? And she says yes. And like, or are you hoping that if you catch this guy that the lambs will stop screaming? And she's like, yeah, like, basically. But then like he's still got more information. He still hasn't given her any information. It's just been her talking at this point. And but then Chilton shows up with the cops, and it's like, he's just like, she's getting escorted out. He doesn't want her there anymore. And so they start pulling her away, and then Lecter's like Agent Starling, your case file. And so she runs back to grab the case file from him, like, out of the cage, and he hands them to her, but then he kind of like rubs his finger on her hand like a little bit, like maybe flirty, or maybe just, it's like, I don't know. It's just it's weird and interesting. It's interesting is what it is. And so she gets escorted out. She gets put on a plane and sent back to Virginia. And so then we see Lecter in his cage, and it's dinner time, and he's got like a cassette player playing classical music, and he's so the guards are bringing his dinner, and it's like he's like, oh, like just a second, and he's behind like a little privacy screen where the toilet is, but he's sitting there, but we see that he has some kind of pin in his mouth that he's been like taken apart or something like that, and he takes it from inside his mouth and puts it into his hands, and then he flushes the toilet and comes out, and then like, all right, the usual drill, and like, oh, and then the guards are talking like, like, oh man, can you believe this guy asked for a second dinner, like lamb chops extra rare, so and then so he goes and sits down next to the bars and puts his like with his back to the bars, and puts his hands outside, and then they cuff him, and then that way they can open the door and bring his food in and everything. But as they're doing that, like he's like, oh, like be careful. He's about to set the tray down on the table. He's like, oh, be careful the drawings, and then we see that he is drawn Clarice like holding a lamb, but it's very like religious painting style, like she's some sort of like figure, like religious figure, like the Madonna or something. And so the cop rolls it up and puts it aside, and then puts the tray down, and then when he turns around, Lecter has uncuffed himself with the pin that he had, and kicks him down, cuffs the... Oh yeah, no, that's what he does first. He grabs the cuffs and cuffs the cop's hand to the cage. And while that guy is being cuffed, he kicks the other cop, kicks the door at him to like kind of knock him, not unconscious, but like kind of, what's the word? But just kind of disorient him. And then he like bites him in the face, like presumably like bites his nose off, but like that's not what happens. And then pulls the mace out of the cop's belt and sprays it in his face and everything. Then grabs the club and beats the one who's cuffed to the bars, beats him over the head, and then we just see the blood everywhere. And he waits for his music to finish as he's like standing there like conducting, covered in blood, and we hear the other cop groaning like and crawling away. And then once the music's done, then Lecter goes after him. He pulls a knife off the ground and then goes after him. And then it cuts down to the lobby of City Hall, and it's like there's police everywhere because it's like a maximum security deal because Lecter's there. And someone notices that the elevator is moving, and they're like, okay, like what's going on? And then they see it go up to 5, and then there's gunshots that they can hear. And then, so now they're all like, okay, like shots fired. And then they're like, wait, like it's moving again. And then the elevator goes down to 3 and stops. I'm like, okay, like, all right, like let's get up there. Be careful, everything. Like everybody arm up. They get up to the 3rd floor. Elevators open, like the door's like stuck open, but the elevator's empty. So they're like, okay, like we gotta like find him, like everybody spread out. They get up to the room where he was being kept. The lights are out except for one like spotlight or something. We see that the first cop that he cuffed to the bars, he's like strung up on the top of the cage with these like American flag drapes, like the bunting from like the wall, is like spread out from him, almost like wings or something like that. And it's like, it's crazy looking. And like, it makes you wonder like how long he worked on that. You know what I mean? Like, was it like 3 hours before the elevator started moving or what? Like, but it's crazy. And then we see the other cop laying on the floor. And they're like, okay, like, someone get up, go check on him. And then one guy's like, oh, he's breathing. And they're like, all right, like, we need an ambulance and the SWAT team and all this stuff. And we see everyone showing up. Ambulance comes in, paramedics get up there. They're loading the cop on the floor, and he's all, like, bloody. Like, you could barely even recognize him. So he's on the floor. They get him loaded up on the gurney, and he starts seizing and everything. They're like, okay, like, we got to get him out of here. So as the stretcher and all these cops are going down the elevator to get him to the ambulance, we see some blood drip onto the white sheet on the stretcher. And then they look up, and there's like a blood pooling from the hatch in the ceiling of the elevator. And they play it cool. They get down to the bottom, take the stretcher out, all the cops go out, and then he like just like quietly presses the button to like keep the elevator there and keep the door open. And then he like quietly tells somebody like, hey, like, he's on the roof of the elevator. Like, so like, we need to get somebody up there. And so they get up to the top. And then they get the elevator door open from like the third floor, and they're looking down, and we see Lecter's body just like kind of sprawled out. There's a gun by his hand, but he's just laying there. He's not moving. And so they're like, okay, like, give him a warning. And then they're like, Lecter, like, put your hands on your head. Nothing. No movement. No talking back. Nothing. And they're like, okay, like, fire a warning shot. Give him one in the leg. And they shoot him in the calf, and no movement at all. They're like, okay, like, something's up. Like, that something's weird. Like, maybe, like, bled out. Like, maybe, like, the cop shot him, and he bled out, trying to escape. They don't know, but then they open the hatch in the elevator, and the body falls. So he's dead, presumably. Except it cuts to the ambulance, and we see the body in the ambulance get up, pull its face off, and it's Hannibal Lecter with the other cop's face like a mask on. He pulls it off and attacks the paramedic that's in there, and then find out later that find out in the next scene as Clarice is being told that he killed everybody in the ambulance, left it in a parking garage, and killed a tourist, and took all his money and ID and everything like that, and then now they have no idea where he is. So then they're just talking, like, and Clarice, like, reassures her friend, like, no, like, I'm safe, he's not gonna come after me, like, I know it. And she's like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's crazy. And she's like, I know it sounds weird, but he would think it rude to, like, come after me. Like, it's, you know, because he's, like, he respects Clarice. And we do get that. You could tell and everything. Just, like, the way he treats her compared to, like, any time he talks to anybody else. Yeah, he gives her a hard time and everything and is a little mean to her, especially in the beginning, but there is, like, a level of respect that you can feel. And then, so then they're just, like, talking, like, you know, just trying to, like, figure it out and everything, and just, like, talking about what Lecter said to her in that, like, last time that they talked. And she's like, and he asked her, like, what does it mean to covet? And they're like, we don't, like, what do we covet? And it's like, you covet what you see every day. And then they're, like, kind of analyzing that line, and it's like, okay, like, then, and they're, like, trying to see how it applies to the bodies that they found so far. And but so the third body that they found, the one that we saw the autopsy for, she was the first victim, but the third body found. And the reason that she was the last one found is because she was weighed down. He didn't bother with the other ones. So, and first it gets brushed off as like, oh, like he just got lazy over time, but it was just something different about her. So, and then they analyze that line like, what do we covet? We covet what we see every day. And that means that Buffalo Bill knew Frederica, the first victim. And so they're like, okay, like, where did she live? Where was she from? She was from Belvedere, Ohio. Clarice goes there. She goes and talks to Frederica's dad. And he's saying, like, I don't, like, he's cooperative and everything. He's like, to be honest, like, I don't know what I could tell you that I haven't already told the authorities, And he's like, okay, like, her room's up there. It's just as it was when she left. Because basically she went to interview for a job. And, like, the interview went okay. Like, so she called home and left the interview and everything was fine, but just never made it home. And that's where she got abducted and everything, was some at some point after the interview and getting home. And so she goes up in the room and just checking it out, seeing what she can find, using her expert sleuthing skills that maybe these other Ohio cops couldn't figure out. And she finds, like, in a music box there's like a little like hidden compartment, and she opens that up and there's Polaroids of Frederica, and there's it's her in her underwear. They're like risque photos, like very private and very hidden in everything, and it's like, okay, like, who is she taking these for? And that's what she needs to figure out. So then she goes into another room, and it's a sewing room. But she notices that there's a dress that is being worked on, and stitched in it is the same exact pattern that was in Frederica's back. So, and then she's on the phone with Crawford, and she's like, it's like he's making a skin suit, like a woman's suit, like he's using their skins to make like a female body for himself. And like, so she figured it out, but Crawford's like in a military plane. Like, he's like, it's like, yeah, like, we figured it out. Like, we cross-referenced the Johns Hopkins records, like, of people who were turned down for the gender reassignment surgery with somebody whose name was on a shipment that was stopped at customs, and it was a shipment of caterpillars from Suriname. So it's like, that's like, it all like intersected right there. We got the weird moths from Asia and someone who got declined for the gender reassignment surgery. So there it is. And his name is James Gum. And so like, all right, like, we got him. We know where he is. He's outside of Chicago. We're on our way there. Like, thank you. So then, like, Clarice is just like, okay, like, and he's like reassuring her, like, don't worry, like, we couldn't have done this without you, like, you're getting full credit, like, don't worry about that, like, even though you're not there when we catch him, you're still getting the full credit for this catch and everything like that. So she still has some, like, stuff she wants to figure out, so she goes and talks to one of Frederica's friends, and she's just like talking to her at a diner. And it's like, oh, like, did she have a boyfriend or anything? And she's like, no, like, maybe one you didn't know about. And she's like, no, like, she told me everything and all this stuff. And then it's like, oh, like, what? Then basically, like, talks to her. It's like, oh, like, did she have anywhere she was going a lot? And she would go and help this Mrs. Lippman, who was, like, teaching her how to sew and everything. And they're like, oh, like, what's the address? What's Mrs. Lippman's address? I'm going to go talk to her. So she just has a lead of someone else she can talk to. And so then we see oh, yeah. I think I skipped over a scene, but I mean, it's not that big of a deal if this one's out of order. Cut back to the basement dungeon, and Catherine's in the bottom of the well, and she's tying, like, she's got, like, her scraps of food that Buffalo Bill gave her, and she's got, like, a little chicken bone or something, and she's tying it up on a string, and she's, like, saying, like, talking to herself, like, she's gonna, like, catch the dog. And so she's, like, tied the string to a bucket, and she's, like, threw the bucket up, and she's trying to, like, trick the dog into, like, getting the bone, and then she'll pull the dog down with the bucket, basically. So as she's trying to do that, we cut to meanwhile, while that's happening, Buffalo Bill, or Jamie, is doing his YouTube makeup tutorial, and is just, like, getting himself all prettied up and everything. And then another iconic part, it's just his lips as he's putting the lipstick on, and then he says, like, "Would you fuck me? I'd fuck me. I'd fuck me so hard." And that's also been parodied a bunch of times. So then he gets, once he's done putting his makeup on, now it's time to get up and dance to the music. And so he's just, like, kind of dancing around, like, with his shawl and everything. He's got his makeup on. He's got his hair all curly and everything. And then, like, he's, like, kind of doing something under the camera. And then he backs up, and we see that he has tucked his penis in and is just, like, standing there. So it looks like a vagina. And just, like, admiring himself with his tucked in genitals and everything. And another very iconic scene. And then we see that then we cut to the police are surrounding the house and everything there, because Crawford was on his way there. They have the place surrounded. They're, like, sneaking up, and they're doing everything, like, as sneaky as possible and everything, being quiet. Catherine finally does catch Precious, the dog, and we hear that the dog yelping, and it's like, and then he figures it out, and he's like, "What are you doing to my dog? Don't hurt my dog, you bitch," and stuff like that. And she's like, "I'm gonna, like, he's hurt real bad, like, I'll kill him if you don't let me out," and stuff like that. And but then, like, as this whole confrontation is happening, then the FBI is upstairs, like, at the door, ringing the doorbell, and there's, like, and he has it, like, wired so it, like, goes off, like, extra loud, so that way he could be blasting his music and doing whatever down in the basement, and then he knows, like, if someone comes at the door. So we see him going upstairs and everything, and he goes to answer the door right as, like, the FBI is, like, about to go in. It's like, all right, they're like, all right, go in now. And so then he opens the door, and it's Clarice. So, and then we see the FBI barge into the house that they're at, and it's completely empty. So they're at the wrong house. They have the right guy, but he's not there. And so Clarice is there looking for Mrs. Lippman, and he is now the owner of Mrs. Lippman's house. And this is the connection. This is how he would have known Frederica and everything, because he either worked with Mrs. Lippman or something, some relative, something. And so she's there talking to James Gumb, and is like, "Oh, like, is Mrs. Lippman here?" And she's like, "No, Lippmans don't live here anymore." And it's like, "Oh, like, did you know them though?" And he's like, "Yeah, like, I knew them." And she's like, "Oh, like, I'm FBI, and I'm just asking questions about Frederica. Maybe you knew her." And he's, like, trying to, like, play dumb a little bit, but then he's like, "Oh, yeah, oh, wait, was she a great big fat lady?" And she's like, yeah, she's a little big. But then, like, very uncomfortable with it, but also like, okay, something's up with this guy. And he's like, oh, I think I have a card for, like a business card for Mrs. Lippman's son. Let me get that for you. And he invites her in, and she comes in. And as he's like looking through all his business cards, and he's like asking questions like, oh, like, do like are what do the FBI know, because the police around here don't know anything. And she's just kind of like, oh, like, just hoping to find some information and everything, not giving away too much. And but as she's like talking to him, making small talk, you could tell she's like analyzing everything. And it's like, okay, like, what's this guy's deal? Is this guy part of it? Is this the guy? And then she sees the moth, the same one from the cocoon, flying around. And she's like, okay. Like, then at that point, she like unclicks her holster, getting her gun ready and everything. And he's like, oh, here's the card, like, I found it. And she's like, hey, like, do you mind if I use your phone? And he kind of just like smirks at her. And then it's like, because like he knows that she knows at this point. And then he's just like thinking what to do. And we've also seen that he has a gun in the room right next to it. It's just sitting on the stove. And so she, seeing his smile and everything, like, pulls her gun and like, freeze, like, don't move, like, hands on your head and everything. And he just like starts laughing and slowly drops all of the, like, lets all of the business cards flutter out of his hands. And then turns around real quick and runs out of the room, grabs the gun, and she like shoots but misses and everything. And then he gets down, he's heading off down in the basement with a stove gun. And then she's goes after him, but she's like, gotta be careful and everything. She can't just go running in blind. So she's going down into the basement. She's making sure to clear every room and everything. Checking the corners, not making the same mistakes that she made in training. We can hear Catherine screaming in the distance. But, she's not going to just run after her. She's got to be safe, be careful and everything. So we just go through the rooms. She opens one room. She sees the the unfinished skin suit that he's working on. And so, yeah, she's like, okay, like, I was right about that. She gets to the room where Catherine is, and like down in the well and everything, and just like telling her like, hey, like, I'm FBI, you're safe, like, I just need you to be quiet, like, shut that dog up. And like, Catherine's like, it's annoying because we know that, like, hey, like, you just need to be quiet so Clarice can get this done. But it's also very understandable that she's like, no, like, you're the help, like, help me, like, not. So she's like, oh, like, don't you leave, you fucking bitch, everything like that. So Clarice keeps moving. She's got to find him and everything before. She's like, okay, like, the police are on their way, like, I just have to catch him. So she's moving back through the basement. She comes upon the room that we saw earlier with all the moths fluttering around and everything. She checks another room, and then we see a like fully, like, I know that's not like what has happened to it, but it just looks like a melted body, because it's presumably Mrs. Lippman, because it's a long hair. And we don't know what happened to her. But yeah, it's just like the hair and like the forehead of a body like sticking out of the tub, but then like the tub is like full of like water and decomposed body, so it just looks like a melted, like, it's disgusting. And then but then we see then all of the lights go out, and we see the click on of James Gunn's night vision goggles, and so it's like completely pitch black for Clarice, but he's got his night vision goggles on and he can see everything. So he's like just following her around as she's like fumbling around in the dark. And this is one of the scariest scenes in any movie to me personally. Like it's so nerve-wracking to even think about like yourself being completely helpless, like in the dark, like you can't see anything, you can't hear anything, and you know you're in danger. That's the thing. It's like, yeah, like you could be in the dark and it's fine, but when you know you're in a life-threatening situation and you're in the pitch black and you can't see anything, and the fact that the person that is out to hurt you can see, and he has all the power, he is right there, and he even like puts his hands like near her head as she's like, and she has no idea, like you can see her face and she just like has no idea that his hands are like right there, like he can just grab her neck or hit her on the head, anything like that. And then but he doesn't, he pulls his hands back, and then we see his gun come up and he's pointing it at her, but as soon as he cocks the gun, she swings around and shoots at him. Like she's got that like sonar hearing or whatever. She like knew the direction that cock sound came from and swings around and just fires like every bullet she has at him. And one of the bullets goes through the window, so now there's light and everything. And we see Buffalo Bill, James Gunn, bleeding out on the ground. He's like coughing up blood. He's got his night vision goggles on, and Starling's fine. Like she's fine, and just like breathing heavy. Like, oh my god, like I did it. Just like a relief, but also just like that's an insane situation to come out of. So then we get the scene of her coming out of the house and everything. The police are there, like, all the investigators are there. Ambulance is there. Catherine's being taken out. She has the dog still, so, we're to assume that she's going to keep the dog now. And then it cuts to Clarice's graduation, and, she's up there. She's getting her badge. Jack's there. He congratulates her. Then he's like, oh, like, I don't really like these things, so I'm just gonna head out, but like congratulations. And then he says that your father would have been proud of you, and it's it's something that she needed to hear, I think. And they shake hands, and then he leaves, and he's like, oh, don't forget, because like right before Jack talks to her, she's like, Clarice, you have a phone call. And he's like, oh, don't forget about your phone call. So she goes and picks up the phone, and it's Hannibal Lecter. I was like, hello, Clarice. And he asks her, like, right there. Oh, and first he says, he says, I forget. Okay, I'm sorry. I know I'm rambling, but I forget the exact order of everything that he says, but he says, like, don't bother tracing the call because I'm going to be off the phone before that even works. And then he says, like, he asked her, like, have the lamb stopped screaming yet? And, like, did it work? Do you have that relief? Are you free of that, like, trauma, I guess, and everything? And then, and he's like, don't worry, I'm not going to come after you because the world's more interesting with you in it. And, she's trying to get answers out of him, but he's not giving anything. And we see him that he's on the phone. He has like a wig on, but knowing him, it's probably just like that tourist's scalp that he's wearing for hair. And he's in... And then he says, like, oh, I'd love to sit and chat, but I'm having an old friend for dinner. And then we see that Chilton has arrived at this same place that he is. So he's basically stalked Chilton on this vacation that he's on. He's definitely in. I don't. It doesn't say exactly if he's in like Jamaica, Bahamas. Come on, Pretty Mama. He's in Kokomo from the Beach Boys song, and yeah, and he's like, but I just love because he's Hannibal the Cannibal, and the fact that he says like, "Oh, I'm having an old friend for dinner." So basically, his intention is to go eat Chilton, which I don't feel bad for because Chilton's a piece of shit. And it's like it's weird to say because like he's technically a good guy because Hannibal Lecter's a serial killer and he's just a civilian or whatever, but hey, I'm not too sad to see him go. And then he hangs up the phone and Clarice is like, Dr. Lecter, Dr. Lecter. But, you know, he's gone. And then we see him hang up the phone and he's following Chilton into the town and disappears into the crowd and everything. And then the credits start rolling. And that is The Silence of the Lambs. Yeah. Like I said, just one of my favorite movies. Just so good, and I feel like it gets better every single time. Like I loved it the first time, like I did, and then, but I notice something new every time, and I just get a bigger appreciation for it and just how perfect it is and everything, and it's and just all the performances are so good. Like especially like Anthony Hopkins got nominated and won the Oscar for this, and I don't remember if he's the least amount of screen time for an Oscar win, but it's up there because he's only in like 16 minutes of screen time in this whole movie, and he got the lead actor win for it. But hey, like that's who you remember, like in terms of actor, because you know they still have it separated actor actress. So in terms of actor, Anthony Hopkins is the one you're remembering. And but that, like, not to say anything against Jodie Foster because she is amazing too, and she is perfect, and she let me check real quick as I'm rambling. I know she got at least nominated, and yes, she did win Best Actress for this. Yeah, also greatly deserving, and she is amazing in this type of role, and that's another reason I'm very excited that she is in True Detective season 4, because like her as a law enforcement solving a crime, solving a mystery, I'm all about that. Like, you know, she obviously proved herself here in like the one of the best examples of that type of story being pulled off on the screen. So I'm very excited for True Detective season 4 because she's in it. But yeah, love this movie. It says right here that Silence of the Lambs became the third film in Academy Award history to win the Big Five for producing, directing, acting, and screenwriting. The other two before this that have done that, It Happened One Night and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Also, Jonathan Demme got Best Director. Obviously, that was in that list. They also got, the Big Five. That's it. Yeah, love this movie. I hope everyone enjoyed the movie if they watched it for the first time or if they watched it again, or just I hope you enjoyed me talking about it in my non-expertise version and rambling of it. Every time, that's the other thing. It's like when I watch it, even though I've seen it a bunch of times, I will continue to think about it for like at least a week. Just thinking about the lines, thinking about the different scenes and everything, just picturing it, and it's just it's just such a good movie. Also, I recently got at a, I think it was like the punk flea market or something like that, and I forget what area it was, like Upland or something like that. And I was just trying to go to the record store, and then I noticed there's like a little flea market outside, and that's all like punks and goths and stuff like that. So it was like really cool. Wanted to check it out, and there was a booth where they had like movie posters and album covers and just like iconic photos, but with like I don't know if it's taxidermy when it's bugs, but like, you know what I'm talking about, like the preserved bugs, like that are framed and everything, but they had them like with a corresponding movie poster, picture, album cover, whatever. And I saw it like immediately, like I like zeroed in on it, and it was Silence of the Lambs poster with the Death's Head moth, like an actual Death's Head moth preserved in there. And then, and before anyone's like, oh, like, is that like, like animal rights, like fishy or whatever, you know, it said that it was like completely sustainable, humane, whatever, you know, it's not like they just like killed a bunch of bugs so they could frame them. It was like, like I'm losing all the words, but you know what I mean. But yeah, it was, yeah, it has the moth over the spot in the poster where the moth is. And if you guys follow the Instagram, I'm going to post it. I'll post it now before the episode even goes up. But yeah, as soon as I saw that, like, I didn't care how much money it was. I bought it right away. I was like, I have to have that because that is too perfect. Like something that, like, when you hear about it, it's like, oh yeah, that's like, it seems like an obvious thing. Like, oh yeah, why wouldn't you do that? But it's also not something that like I would have ever even thought of. Like before seeing it, I never would have thought of that. And I was just like, I have to have that. So I got it. I just finally hung it up recently. And that's probably why I decided to do this movie first for the, Best Picture winners for the Oscar month. But yeah, sorry for losing track there at the end, kind of went off the rails, but I'm just so excited about that piece of art that I have in my home now. But yes, thank you everyone for listening. I hope everyone's having great 2023 so far. And thank you for listening. Thank you for anyone who maybe this is your first episode. I hope you subscribe. I hope you continue to listen. I hope I didn't scare you off by just, I don't know. I hope I didn't scare you off. And yeah, just keep listening. Subscribe. Tell other people about it. If you know other people that are big movie fans or podcast fans or whatever, just get the word out. I appreciate it. I appreciate you guys. And thanks again. And I will see you next week. Stay tuned. Bye.